Hey, everybody, and welcome to Identity Brand Power for Success. Thank you guys for joining me. My name is Aaron Gore. I am the founder and consultant at Fresh Pitch Beverage Consulting, helping breweries across the world be able to expand their business and really tap into their full potential. But I know a few of you out there, and I know there's a few others who are asking yourselves, who the hell is this guy and why should I care? Well, fortunately for you, I've got a slide for that. So, as I said, founder of Fresh Pitch Beverage Consulting, been in the beverage industry pretty much my entire adult life, working with breweries across the world. As a matter of fact, I have been able to consult for breweries on 3 separate continents. It's been one hell of a ride. But the thing that I am the most passionate about is helping breweries really be able to discover what they can be and who they truly are and be able to leverage that to provide value, not only to their consumers, but also to their staff and to themselves. And one of the things that I've come across pretty consistently over the years is that one of the single most important things that you can do for your company and for your brand is to focus on branding. But that raises the question, if we're going to be talking about the importance of branding, we really have to define branding. So, what exactly is a brand, anyways? Normally this would be the part of the conversation where I'd be asking people for answers, but seeing as how you guys are scattered all over the US and I don't want to wait for the questions to hit the chat, I'll just go ahead and tell you a brand. That's the gut feeling or general perception that a customer has about your company, service, or product. Now, very simple, very straightforward, nothing terribly complex about that. But one thing that I want you to keep in mind is the orientation of that statement. It's not the feeling that you have about your company, your service, your product. No, it's the perception that customers have. It's outside of you. It's outside of your company, and it's something that you can't necessarily control. But that doesn't mean that it's not important. And more importantly, it doesn't mean that you can't influence it. Doesn't matter. Doesn't mean that it isn't something that you should be guiding, that you should be taking an active role in. No, it's something that exists anyways. And that's one of the key things about a brand, because people ask me all the time, man, this is the beer industry. If you brew it, they will come. But that kind of field of dreams thinking, it's not true anymore to whatever degree it ever was true, and honestly it never really was. No, we're in an environment where things have changed pretty dramatically. There are 10,000 breweries in the US right now. The average grocery store has 200, 300 individual products on the shelf. The dive bar down the street has 3, 4, 5 craft beer taps. Guys, if the goal of our industry was to make it easier to access great beer no matter where you were, then we did it. We won. Making great beer is important, but that's not what it's all about anymore. No, making people care about your great beer is what's important, and that is what a brand is all about. Because at the end of the day, perception is so much more than reality. And I think we all intrinsically know that. At the end of the day, generic drugs do literally the exact same thing as the name brand, but I bet you have Tylenol sitting in your medicine cabinet right now. It's the reason it sells as much as it does. At the end of the day, McDonald's doesn't exactly make a great hamburger, but they sell a whole lot of them because it's consistent, because people know what to expect, because it has a brand that's very strong, very recognizable. And if you're driving around in a part of the country you've never been before, you can see a whole lot of names you don't recognize, but you recognize McDonald's. And even if it's not necessarily one that you think you're going to like the best, you know exactly what you're about to get. That's important to people because that is brand. And understanding your brand is the only way that you can actually influence it, because even if it's not in your control, you can nudge customers along. You can build your company around driving that brand towards the things that you want to represent and the things that you want to get across. But you can't get there if you don't know where you are. I mean, if you don't know where you're at now, I mean, think back to the days of MapQuest. If you didn't know where you were starting, it was very hard to find the route to your destination. So you have to have a good understanding of the way you're perceived and the way the customers are viewing your brand if you're going to be able to drive it towards where it should be. And this is important, not just in holistic terms, not just in emotional terms, but in dollars and cents as well. At the end of the day, customers spend up to twice as much on a brand that they feel an emotional connection to. And we're uniquely positioned as an industry to make people care about what we're doing. I mean, if it was as simple as just putting good product in a can, ABI can make the same beer that anybody in the country is. That's the big unspoken secret. Anheuser-Busch has the best brewers on earth. bar none. That's not a controversial statement. They do. They can make your beer and they can probably make it better and cheaper than you, but it wouldn't sell because it's missing that element of connection, that piece of authenticity that people want to invest in. Brands matter. And it's not only just that it matters, it's the single biggest factor in most purchases. Now, I know that sounds crazy to a lot of folks. And a lot of people, when they hear me say that, think that I'm saying that product doesn't matter, but product very, very much does matter. The issue is if somebody has never had your beer before, then it can't be your product selling them their first one. Has to be your brand. Even if they're buying it because they've heard about how good it is, that's still part of your brand. That's your reputation. That's something that you've earned. That's trust that you've earned. Because trust so often is a byword for brand. That is not only the perception that people have of your company, of your product, of your service. It's also about the trust that you've engendered in them to know that even if you come out with something absolutely novel, a new product, a new beer, a new tap room, that the good experiences they've had before, that their friends or family have had before, that they've read about online or seen on Untapped, they can trust that this one is going to be reflective of that as well. Good branding is essential. Good product is essential too. But good product keeps them coming back for more. And more importantly, that good product reinforces the power of your brand. One important truism to keep in mind, and I say this in a whole lot of the seminars that I put on, is that at the end of the day, there are more successful breweries with good brands and mediocre beer than vice versa. We all know that it's true. Up until very recently, Bud Light was the number one selling beer in the United States. It is absolute trash panda, but it's highly consistent. It has really good branding. And for the most part, they could do no wrong from a marketing standpoint for a very, very long time. Going back to the McDonald's reference, it's no one's favorite food. Domino's is no one's favorite pizza. But when you have a consistent product that is well branded and well marketed, it's amazing how powerful that can be. The trust is there. Might not be the trust of quality, but it is the trust of expectations. There's other benefits to a strong brand as well. It does create that virtuous cycle. People come back to a brand that has proven itself in the past. Every good beer they have from you makes them that much more likely to pick up their next beer, even if it's something that they've never tried before, as long as it's from you. You're the one who's built that trust. It also makes it easier to acquire new customers when you have branding that jumps off the shelf and communicates who you are and what you're about. People like to connect with brands, even ones that they've never bought from before. And when they understand what the product is about and they understand what you're about, it makes it that much easier for them to overcome that initial step, that willingness to buy that first product. That's really what a brand does. If you look at willingness to buy by a customer on any given product as a bit of a scale, a thermometer almost that climbs up with time. Once it reaches the top, they'll spend their money on whatever it is that you're selling. You're starting from zero if you don't have any sort of brand and they've never seen you before and there's nothing there. It's just a plain white box. But if you have good branding, that lets you start higher up on that thermometer. It's not so heavy a lift. It makes it easier to be able to acquire customers right from the get go. And right now, one of the biggest aspects of a solid brand is it makes people less sensitive to price. Spend twice as much on brands that people have an emotional connection to. Remember that from earlier. Well, right now we're in the middle of a massive amount of inflation where a lot of people are feeling more of a crunch on their daily market basket than they ever have before. Wouldn't it be nice if people were a little more willing to spend on your brand because of the fact they feel a connection to it? That keeps them loyal as well. It keeps them coming back because as people become less willing to risk what few dollars they feel they have left to spend discretionarily, they're going to want to spend it on things that they see as reliable. That trust is important. It also drives the value of the company as a whole. Now, this is one of those things that, as an industry, we don't like to talk about a whole lot. Is the fact that there's a lot of folks right now who are exploring exits, whether that's because they're starting to age out, or whether that's because they want to do something else for a living and just get out of the beverage industry, or because of financial challenges that are forcing them to sell. There's a lot of succession planning going on in craft beer right now. Well, an important thing to keep in mind is that 20% of the average value of a craft brewery, or of any business rather, is made up of its brand equity. Craft beer actually tends to be higher than that, especially now that stainless is so cheap and actual physical assets are going for a steal in relative terms. Your brand is your value. No brand, no value. But before we talk about how to use your brand. We need and how to build a good sense of what your brand is. And we are going to get to that. We're going to go through what it's like to actually build a brand guide for yourself and for your company and how to leverage that. We need to talk about one aspect of branding that's become far more important in recent years. This is brand architecture. So what brand architecture basically means is, you have a layer of different brands. Think Kellogg's Frosted Flakes. Those are both brands. They're all part of the same company, but they play different roles and they're at different levels of the hierarchy of their brand. So, right over here on your left hand side is a parent brand. Parent brand is what you think of with your brewery, the actual name of your brewery. This is the big one, the one that everybody knows, the umbrella that everything else falls under. We're all pretty familiar and tend to understand what that means, but beneath that is a sub brand. Now, this would be more the products that you actually put out. Let's say the name of your company is Bob's Brewing and you have the Bob's Brewing Jungle Juice IPA. Jungle Juice IPA is that sub brand. It's not replacing Bob's Brewing, and everybody is well aware of the fact that this is a product from Bob's Brewing, but it does have its own identity and its own distinction. Now, where this becomes important is that endorsed brand, the next one down, because this is kind of all the rage in beer these days. An endorsed brand is where, yes, you're not necessarily trying to hide who it's from, but the actual sub brand itself has become the main driver for people, the main thing that they associate the product with. Voodoo Ranger is the single best example of this. There's quite a few others popping up right now. If you ask your average person on the street who makes Voodoo Ranger, they're going to tell you some variation of Voodoo Ranger Brewing Company. Most people don't even know it's from New Belgium. Look at that can. Everything about it says Voodoo Rangers, Voodoo Ranger IPA. In this case, IPA is even the sub brand of Voodoo Ranger. New Belgium is that parent brand right at the top, just providing an endorsement of everything else about the brand. And that's been very successful because what this does is lets you extend your brand equity beyond what you'd be able to do otherwise. When you think New Belgium Brewing, what do you think historically, pre Voodoo Ranger? What would it be your association? Be Belgian beers, traditional styles, somewhat staid, reserved, austere marketing. Now think of Voodoo Ranger. It's the exact opposite of all that. And if there's one commonality other than their pumpkin beer that ties all of them together just about, it is the fact that they are very hop focused, very hop forward, and very on trend. That is what Voodoo Ranger is about. And it lets New Belgium leverage into areas of association and trust and consumer interest that otherwise they wouldn't be able to if they tried to slap everything under a big New Belgium banner. But you can only do that so far because just like Voodoo Ranger would have felt way outside the box for New Belgium, it's possible for New Belgium to get overextended as well. Over on the right, I don't know if anybody remembers Devilishly Lager. This was like only a couple of years ago, y'all. It's already been canceled. This was a light lager that was it was an endorsed brand of an endorsed brand, endorsed by Voodoo Ranger, but it's not hoppy. It's not on trend in the same way that the Voodoo Ranger products are. It didn't feel the same, wasn't targeting the same demographic. And as a result, it completely and utterly became overextended and lost its brand equity. So a note to be wary of. But the most important thing for your own company, the single most important thing, is to go ahead and keep a focus on what your brand actually is. And to do that, you need to actually define your brand. You need to actually identify what your brand is about. And in order to do that, you have to sit down and create a set of brand guidelines. So, when you are defining your brand, one chief thing that I ask everybody to do is make sure that you're writing all of this down. Why do we want to write it down? Why can't we just keep it in our heads and just do this as a mental exercise? Well, when you write something down, you can hold yourself accountable to it. It gives you something to refer back to, and it gives you something physical that you can point to and say, this is what we are about, and this is what we do for any of the problems that may be in existence with, for example, the US Constitution. At the end of the day, no one was saying to themselves a better solution would be to keep all this stuff in our heads. No, you put it on paper. That way you have to address it. And you have to refer back to it when you are making decisions for the future. And the same thing goes for your company. So when you're defining your brand, keep in mind who is actually defining your brand in real terms, because it isn't you. It's the customers. So, in order to figure out what your brand should be, in order to figure out how to tell your story, first you have to understand who you are. So, first thing you got to do is actually find out what people think about your brand. This is less important for startups, but for active in business breweries, you have to figure out what people think about your company. So, be realistic and go out and talk to people. Go sit in the tap room for a while. Don't tell anybody who you are. Just strike up a conversation. Listen to what they're saying. If you're out at a bar that happens to be serving your products, ask them what their thoughts are on the company. Ask them why they ordered that product. Inversely, ask them why they didn't order the product if you see them order something else. But most importantly, don't just ask your friends and family, ask actual regular customers, because how many of us started a craft brewery and because we were home brewers and everybody told us how good our beer was, and my mom said my logo looked great and it was perfect, and I don't know why the customers just don't appreciate that. It's because other people have different incentives, and of course your mom's going to tell you your logo looks great, and of course your partner's going to tell you that the beer tastes fantastic. Find out what real people think. Now, once you understand what they actually think about your brand, that tells you where you are. Now you got to figure out where you want to go. In order to do that, the three questions that you have to keep at your top of your mind are very simple. Who are you? What do you do? And why is it important? Those are three absolutely important questions. And they seem very simple, but they can be more difficult than you think. The first two are pretty obvious. Who are you? Bob's Brewing. What do you do? Make beer. Why is it important? Well, that's where it became problematic, because if your only differentiator is that you make beer, that's not a differentiator anymore. There's a lot of people who make beer. And if you make good beer is the only differentiator you can come up with, it's important to keep in mind that not only is quality subjective, but again, Bud Light sells a lot more beer than you ever will. So you might want to rethink whether or not quality is what you want to stake your claim on. Now, why is it important has to be about what you do differently, or who you are that is different than anybody else in your market. And that's a question that you have to answer, because if you can't answer why what you do is important, I guarantee you that customers can't either. Then you have to figure out how you're actually communicating that. Your voice, the visual language, any taglines or slogans that you use. Those are the critical building blocks to defining who you are and what your brand really is. So when creating some brand guidelines, some things to keep in mind. And we'll go through each of these in turn. Apologies, I'm still getting over a chest cold, which seems to be the case every time I'm on Craft Beer Professionals. But the first one that you have to keep in mind is brand story. That's answering those three questions in an actual narrative format. The elevator pitch, your voice, the taglines, the descriptors that you're going to be using, and that visual language that you're going to be using to actually communicate what your brand is about. So, first up, your brand story. So, this is a simple exercise. Sit down, take a couple of paragraphs, write out the answers to those three questions in a way that reads like a short story, a short narrative, a short explanation of who your brewery is. And I think for most people, they have an idea of how they'd answer these questions. But sit down and commit it to paper, and make sure that the key focus that you have is on making it uh, about your differentiators and what makes you unique and what makes you different, telling your story, where you're from, why people should care, what the ethos of your company is, and get that all on paper. Again, two, three paragraphs. That's all you need. Then sit down and read it. If it's interesting to you, that's a good sign. But if you're sitting down and you're reading it and it's not really holding your interest, or it doesn't feel compelling or exciting to you, that's a problem. Because if it's not compelling and exciting to the person who created it, then it sure as hell is not compelling and exciting to customers. So that's a sign that maybe you need to sit down and give a little more thought to exactly why anybody should be spending their hard-earned dollars on the beer that you're making or visiting your tap room, when these days they have so many other options. It's not doom and gloom. It doesn't mean that there's no hope for you. It means that this is an opportunity for you to give more thought to exactly what those answers are. Once you have that brand story, though, another thing that you got to keep in mind is how to turn that into an elevator pitch. Now, this is real short and sweet. Two, maybe three sentences instead of three paragraphs, a distillation of everything that's in that brand story. And this is absolutely critical, because at the end of the day, do you know what your average investor wants to hear? Just that, just the elevator pitch. They don't care about a whole long story. They don't care about hearing the whole history of your company. They want a real quick, punchy version of those three questions. Who are you? Why is it? Who are you? What do you do? And why is it important? And if you can't make them care in 2 or 3 sentences, then that's all the time that you got. And you're not going to be able to get their investment. Same goes for banks. And honestly, in a lot of circumstances, the same goes for customers. Customers' attention is being pulled in a million directions at any given time, now more than ever. They've got their phones, they've got a million products sitting on the shelf, they've got bars and restaurants all over the place, they've got their other interests, because at the end of the day, most customers don't care that much about craft beer. You need to catch their attention and you need to capture it quick. Your elevator pitch is your best way of doing that. So it doesn't have to be perfect. Just make it compelling. Make it something that's got a hook and make it something that's interesting. Because if you can't describe what your company is about really, really quickly, no one else is going to be able to, too. And when they're recommending your company to friends or family or other people in their lives, they're not going to be able to do it because no one wants to sit there and listen to somebody drone on for an hour about stuff that only marginally matters to them, even though that's exactly what I'm doing right now. That brings us to your voice. Now, what do I mean by voice? I don't know if anybody's ever followed the Wendy's Twitter account, but they have a very defined voice on there, and it's very consistent. And that voice is asshole. The Wendy's Twitter account is a massive asshole. Doesn't seem like the thing you'd expect out of a pigtailed, red-haired fast food chain, but it's extremely consistent and creates something very distinct and very engageable, very funny, frankly, that makes it hard not to listen and not to watch and not to find it just absolutely interesting. That's not what everybody has to do. But my point is this: there's an actual voice there. It feels like there is a real person on the other end of all their marketing efforts. It feels like there's somebody actually there and not just a chat bot who's coming up with generic responses to people's questions. And that's important because at the end of the day, we are very simple creatures as a species. We tend to relate to each other in predictable ways, but more importantly, we tend to relate to companies similar to how we would relate to people. We view companies like they are people and have personalities, and that's really a good way of describing what a brand is. It's the personality of your business. And when I say personality, I don't just mean the way that it behaves, but also the consistency of its behavior. Because somebody doesn't have a personality if every single time that you talk to them, sometimes they're up here and manic and crazy, and sometimes they're morose and depressed, and sometimes they're just quiet and sullen, and sometimes they're loud and over the top. That we find people like that off-putting because there's no way of knowing what to expect from their behavior, no way of really being able to get a good bead on who they are. The same goes for companies. Companies have personalities. That's what your brand is, and your voice, how you portray it, is important as well. So, how are you communicating with your consumer? What are you going for? Is your brewery the college frat guy, just all here for the party, not taking anything too serious? Is it something studious and severe and focusing on the technical aspects of the beer? Or is it something that is adventurous and focused on pushing the outer bounds of what beer can be? Is it about the community experience first and foremost, since the warm uncle who just comes in and brings everybody in and says, you're all welcome here? What is the voice that you're communicating with? Because if it changes every single time somebody different pops on your social media, customers feel that and it's off putting. They don't know what to make of you. You have to set the tone of what that voice is going to be and set those phrases, set those words, set the approach, set the personality of your company so that you're able to start building some of those associations consistently. That way, people know what to make of you and they know how to respond to you. And those taglines, those descriptives, those are absolutely critical as well. These are not just a slogan. It's not just something you throw out there, but it's even about sitting down and figuring out what kind of associations you want to have with certain descriptors. If you're a brewery that's been around for 25 years, for example, old isn't how you want to be described. Legacy, perhaps, revered, founder, innovator. Like those are things that you want to be associated with, but old, dusty, tired. They aren't. All those things mean, at least to some degree or another, very similar things, but there's very different connotations to each of them. So you need to figure out how you want to be portrayed and aim for those. More importantly, use those repeatedly. Make sure you get them in people's heads. In the example that we have here, we have them describing themselves as being about flavor and innovation. They're pioneers. That's a good one. They're original, unique. They're focused on exploration. They're the founders, fresh, trendsetters. They're focused on taste. They're not heritage, not old school, they're not traditional, they're not normal, and none of those are even necessarily bad things, but it's not how they want to be positioned because that does carry a lot of baggage for people when they think about those terms. So sit down and make a list. So make a list of the different taglines that you want to use, the cases that they need to be used in, and why they're important. Because if you sit down with your company's slogan and it means nothing to you, you can't describe when and how it should be used, then it probably is one that's not doing a whole lot for you out in the market either. Well, there we go. And that brings us to the visual language. So, more than almost any other segment, visual language has to be consistent. We are very visual creatures. You would never know it from the fact that I'm basically legally blind without my glasses. But for all of us, our eyesight is the first place that we go. And when we see something, that's absolutely important to us when it comes to how we develop associations, how we build patterns in our head, how we relate to things. So consistency is absolutely critical because if things aren't consistent, then there is no pattern. There's nothing there. It's a tabula rasa. It's different every single time. It's mutable. So you need not only a logo that is recognizable, simple, easy to remember, and easy to associate, and those things are important. There's a whole category of breweries out there who have logos that look like they were done in MS Paint in 1996, and I get not everybody can afford a high-powered marketing firm or graphic designer. Uh, but these days you have more options than ever between Fiverr and the proliferation of talented people within the industry who can design you something that hits those marks. Make it very distinctive, make it very simple, and make it something that people are able to recognize the moment they see it rather than having to sit there staring at it, trying to figure out exactly what it is or what it says. It has to be something that, even at a glance, evokes the feelings and evokes those descriptives that you're going for, the personality that you're going for, because you don't want that dissonance of having a very austere, old school style logo and then having everything about what you're doing screaming, "Look, we're exciting, relevant, and young." It's like that uh, meme. What's that actor's name? And I'm going to blank on this now that I'm on camera. But the "Hello, fellow school children." That's not the impression you want to give off. You want the appearance to match the words. You want the appearance to match the personality and the vibe that you're attempting to give off. It's also important that you have at least a version of your logo that you can render in only two colors. This is important for a lot of things. For example, shirts become prohibitively expensive and sometimes impossible if you have a bunch of colors on there. But there's going to be certain outside context uses where you can only use two colors, black and white. So you need something that can be rendered that way, or at least a version that can be rendered that way in case, for example, a local charity wants to use your logo and can only render it that way. It's also important to, if you have multiple variations of your visual assets, when should they be used? If you got a little simplified logo you're using as the favicon up by the URL bar for your website, that's not something you want slapped on Instagram, for example. Set those use cases to prevent any sort of confusion. Make sure that the optimal version is being used for any given format. Another thing that's important: colors. Colors need to be consistent. Right here we have a six color a 5 color palette. Important exercise to sit down is come up with what your core colors are and what your accent colors are and use those consistently, because those colors are going to jump out even before the logo. That's going to be the thing that sticks with people the most, because that's the if your logo is what you are saying, then the color of everything is going to be the tone of voice you're using. If I say, "Get over here," that's one thing. If I say, "Get over here," that's a much different thing. And if I say it like Scorpion in Mortal Kombat, that's a very, very different thing. Having those colors there to help set the tone and really provide some context as to who you are and what you're doing is absolutely critical for continuing to build that consistency. And that's going to be something I keep coming back to: is consistency. Single most important part about building a solid brand. Uh, and then last one to keep in mind is fonts. And this is one that gets neglected time and time again from people around the industry. Uh, Fonts are important. They seem like an afterthought. They seem like they're not that important. Try using Comic Sans or Papyrus in anything that you send to a graphic designer or marketer, and you will find out real quick just how important that they are. Good fonts are ones that help reinforce everything else about your brand because just like every other aspect of your brand, it's not just letters, it's helping build a tone, it's help building a feel, it's help building a vibe. And even something that feels like a not so great font or a generic font even can have a huge impact with the way things feel. Try sitting down sometime and look at the difference between a sans version or a serifed version and a sans serif version of the same font. They feel different. And it can be hard to put your finger on, but one of them feels significantly more formal than the other. Typically, the serifed version. It's those little aspects that help go to create an entire look and feel and tone to your visual look, the same as that voice does for your written communication or for your spoken communication. But now we've sat down and created brand guidelines. How do you actually put it to work? How do you actually make this do something in your favor? Make it actually help give you a return on the time and the investment that you put into it? Well, again, consistent messaging is absolutely critical. But one important caveat of that is you also need to be three dimensional. Don't be so consistent that you become monotonous. We all know that person who is very consistently kind of like this. They only have one tone of voice and they sound like Ben Stein and Ferris Bueller every time they do anything. You know, that is consistent. It has a personality. You know exactly what they're about, but it's not necessarily something that you want to engage with. So you need some of those highs and lows. Just make sure that they're all within a range and that they're all coming from the same place. It's also important to keep in mind that as one of your products becomes more successful, it helps bring everything else along with it. If your IPA is absolutely killing it, then it is going to help your porter. It's not going to help your porter nearly enough to make it make sense to have a porter on your menu. I love porters; they never make sense to have on your menu, but it's going to do a whole lot better than if it were just some generic store brand porter. The better that any element of your portfolio does, the better it helps the entire portfolio do. It's mutually reinforcing. And that's a massive advantage of having a very successful, very powerful brand. By the same token, it's also important to know sometimes when you need to redirect your own energies away from a product that's really built a ton of brand equity and harvest some of its brand equity to help support some of the up and coming products. We saw a lot of this as the industry was trying to figure out the rise of hazy IPAs. Almost every major brewery in the country had to start adding them to their portfolio. So the question they had was, what did they do with their legacy flagships? Well, in a lot of those cases, honestly, they were strong enough to fly on their own. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is my favorite beer on the planet. Do not ask me where I have a Sierra Nevada tattoo. I will not tell you. But at the same time, as the Little Thing series was starting to take off, especially Hazy Little Thing, they had to make a decision on how many marketing dollars and how much time and energy and customers focus they spent on Pale Ale or Torpedo versus the Little Things. They made the right decision. They put that energy behind Little Things because they knew that, at least to a degree, Pale Ale especially had enough brand equity and enough love in people's minds that it could survive a little while on its own. That's called harvesting the brand equity that you've earned over time and using the success of the Sierra Nevada brand as a whole to pull these new brands forward and stay on trend and stay on the edge of the market. And that's something they've done fantastically. It's also important when you're getting your brand built and really getting in front of people to get in front of many people as possible. It doesn't matter how awesome a brand you've built on paper or how fantastic a story you have to tell if nobody's hearing it. The world's best book could have been written by somebody living in a cave, but until it's unearthed, it's not the world's best book. It's just an abandoned stack of papers in a cave somewhere. Same goes for your brand. So get in front of people at every opportunity on social media, every social media outlet you're able to get your hands on and spare the time to use. Make QR codes and put them on business cards, throw them everywhere, get in front of people with posters, be at every festival you're able to, within reason. Don't burn yourself out, don't kill yourself. But the more places that you're able to get customers to engage with your brand, the more opportunity your brand has to work for you. And that's going to make your life a lot easier in the long term. And last but not least, it's important to always make sure that it's a dialogue. Again, the people building your brand isn't you, it's your customers. They're the ones who are really deciding what you're about. So while you're influencing the way that they are thinking about your products, your services, your company, it's also important to make sure that you're continually getting that feedback and taking it seriously. That doesn't mean abandoning an entire strategy because somebody didn't like something. No, I mean there's a famous saying that customers don't know what they like what they know, and that is true. But it's still important feedback to get. And if something's clearly not working and consistently not working, you need to know that, and you need to know it hopefully before you've spent an enormous amount of money on a campaign that otherwise you can't afford. Steve Buscemi, thank you. Josh, appreciate it. Could not for the life of me remember that. Tips for brand cultivation. Some additional tips. Again, consistency is key. I think I've had this on like the last 5 slides. See, that's me being consistent to get across to you the importance of consistency. So if you remember nothing else from this entire presentation, Lord knows, I think we'd all like to forget our time together. Consistency is key. Part of that consistency is also having somebody who's the primary stakeholder. If everybody in the brewery is responsible for brewing the beer, then nobody's going to know whose turn it is to brew the beer or who's deciding what goes in what tank. No, that's why you have a brewer. Even if you have multiple people who know how to brew, you have one person whose responsibility it is, and everybody else might be accountable or consulted. But you have a chief brewing officer, for lack of a better term. Same needs to go for your brand. For a lot of companies, this is going to be the owner, or it's going to be the primary operator. But you need a quote CBO, a chief brand officer, not as a formal position, but as somebody whose job it is to refer back to those guidelines, refer back to the strategies you've built, the things that you've collectively agreed to, and make those decisions on, hey guys, are we drifting further away from the brand, or are we sticking to what we committed to and what we know is going to work? If only we stop chasing squirrels. With that in mind, you have to make sure that you're following the strategies you set. This goes for way more than branding. Set a strategy, follow a strategy. Set a target, hit a target. Set a goal, meet a goal. However you want to say it, you have to be willing to commit to things and realize that nothing's going to happen overnight. And you have to build a project plan, and you have to have a destination in mind. And if every time some small wrinkle happens, you go off in a different direction, that's a great way to find yourself going in circles. Doesn't mean never change. It doesn't mean go down blind alleys, or just, like a lemming, go straight off of a cliff if something's clearly not working. No, no, no. Like, these are living documents, and this is a living concept. You need to be adaptable because agility is one of the key advantages that craft breweries have. But by the same token, you need to make sure that you're acting with intention and that you have that common goal in mind, because it's very easy to get mission drift in small businesses. And mission drift on your brand can set you up for a situation where no one knows what to make of you. And that is a very, very fast way to find yourself without a customer. It's also important not to overextend the brand. If you've built your entire company around the concept of being a Reinheitsgebot following German brewery, that is a very narrow identity, but it's a very, very important one, very specific one. And it gives you a very clear, differentiated position in the market. If you're going to deviate from that, you need to make sure you're doing it with eyes wide open, that you're not going to jeopardize all of the goodwill and all of the identification and equity that you've been able to build up, that persona you've built up in people's minds by chasing after opportunities that might be good in the short term but bad in the long term. And if you do need to make a pivot and reposition yourself, make sure that you're doing that intentionally, not just chasing something that sounds good right now because everybody's doing it at the risk of all the customers you've earned so far. It's also important to be different or be dead. If you are going to be a steampunk brewery, you need to be the only steampunk brewery in town. And if you are not the first steampunk brewery in town, then congratulations, you're not a steampunk brewery, you're a copycat brewery. That's your differentiator. That's not picking on steampunk. That's any concept. You have to be different. 10,000 breweries, and your differentiator, at least to a degree, can even be we're the brewery in X neighborhood. But then you have to ask yourself, what is your differentiator from the bars and restaurants in your neighborhood? If proximity is the only advantage that you have, you don't have much of an advantage, because if a business opens up, maybe a sports bar, maybe a wine bar that's in closer proximity to people, then you've even lost that. So make sure that you not only know what makes you different, but that you own that concept and that you live that concept. At the end of the day, it's never a good idea to try and beat somebody else at their own game. One of the quirks of humans is that once we get something set in our head, an association built in our head, it's very, very difficult to move that association off. No one is ever going to trust a company named Enron with their money ever again. Why? Because the association has been pretty well built up exactly what Enron means. So no matter how successful or no matter how good the business model or the business plan is for some startup company trying to be Enron too, or in I don't know, Enronia or something, that's a terrible idea. First the market's good. First scaler is even better. But if you're first to a concept, you'll almost always wind up winning that concept. And last but not least on this, guys, just keep in mind, building a brand is not something that happens overnight. It's something that takes time, just like building a friendship. That's one of the things I kind of envy about my daughters is the fact that, if my 5-year-old meets another 5-year-old, it's basically as simple as saying, "Hi, I'm Nellie. Want to be friends?" And that's all it takes. But, for adults, that's not how it works. And for customers, that's not how it works either. It takes time for people to be able to learn to trust certain elements of your personality and figure out if they like you on a consistent basis. If you guys have shared interests, have shared values, if you're somebody they want to spend more time with. Same goes for companies. So have faith, stay the course, and keep in mind that it might not always be obvious just how immediate the impact of what you're doing is. But if every one of those little elements adds up, it's incredible just how much of a mountain you're able to move with time. Few other assorted musings I'll just leave on there. Just absorb all that, guys. Seize your and some recommended reading. So there's a few books that if you do want to explore deeper down the world of branding, either reach out to me. I'd be happy to have a conversation, or if you'd like to do some self-guided stuff. Big ones on here I'm going to point to are definitely going to be Marty Neumeier's series. The Brand Gap, especially, is just absolutely fantastic. But all three of them, quick reads, really informative reads that will, really get you caught up to speed with not only the importance but how to have a successful brand, and all very, very light, very, very fun reads. The other one that I always recommend is right down there at the bottom. That is a book by David Gluckman called That Shit Will Never Sell. David Gluckman is a crazy old South African dude who is the innovation director for Diageo for decades and decades before it was even Diageo. And he's the guy behind Kerrygold Butter and Bailey's Irish Cream and Tanqueray 10 and a bunch of other brands. It's a really fun read. It's requisite reading material for any of my salespeople or marketing people. And it's something I keep recommending over and over again because you'll get a really good sense for how to create products and brands that customers are going to love and customers are going to engage with. And more importantly, the ways to avoid the missteps that he's earned the hard way over decades of being in his position. But with that in mind, guys, appreciate you so much. I'm going to go ahead and keep a lookout now for any questions that anyone may have. Appreciate everybody's time today. And not seeing any dropped in there right now. If anybody does have any questions, if anybody would like to reach out, this is my social media information. You can also find me at AMJGORE. That's AMJGore at gmail.com. I always love making connections around the industry and love connecting with awesome folks who love beverage as much as I do. Cheers and have a great day.